The world never saw it coming. In a room packed with the planet's most powerful leaders, where polished words and careful smiles usually ruled, something raw and unforgettable happened. It was the Global Unity Conference in Dubai, a gathering meant to smooth over tensions, boost trade, and parade unity for the cameras. Presidents, prime ministers, and tycoons filled the hall, their whispers buzzing like static. Everyone expected the usual: safe speeches, vague promises, and handshakes that meant nothing. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, had other plans. He wasn't there to play nice. He was there to speak truth. And when he locked eyes with Donald J. Trump, the former U.S. president known for his unfiltered bravado, the air in the room shifted. What happened next wasn't just a moment. It was a spark that set the world ablaze. Traoré sat quietly at first, his military uniform crisp, the green and red of Burkina Faso's flag stitched proudly on his sleeve. At 37, he was younger than most in the room, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who'd seen his nation bleed. He'd taken power in a coup, not for glory, but to fight for a Burkina Faso free from foreign chains. Across from him sat Trump, his suit sharp, his grin confident. Trump was no stranger to controversy. His words often cut like a blade, and he wielded them without apology. The conference was a stage, and Trump loved a stage. But so did Traoré. And when Trump took the microphone, no one could have predicted how the day would end. Trump's speech started with his usual flair. He talked about trade, power, and making deals that put America first. The crowd nodded, some out of agreement, others out of habit. Then he turned his gaze toward Africa. "Look at Africa," he said, his voice booming. "It's a puzzle nobody's solved. You've got resources, sure, but it's all tangled up in mismanagement and excuses. It's a shame, really." The room stirred. Some chuckled nervously. Others glanced at the African leaders present, unsure how to react. The comment hung in the air, bold and biting. Most would have let it slide. Most would have stayed silent. But not Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't leap to his feet. He didn't shout. He simply rose, steady and deliberate, his boots clicking softly on the marble floor. Every eye turned to him. Cameras swiveled. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that makes your heart race. Traoré stepped to the center of the stage, his face calm, but his presence electric. He looked at Trump, not with anger, but with a fire that burned deeper. "With respect, Mr. Trump," he began, his voice clear and unwavering. "You see a puzzle. I see a masterpiece. You see mismanagement. I see a continent robbed of its chance to shine." The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Traoré's words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of centuries. He didn't stop there. "Africa is not your riddle to solve," he said. "It's a story of strength, of survival, of people who've built empires while the world tried to break them. You talk of mismanagement, but who drew the borders that split our tribes? Who drained our rivers and mines to build your cities? Who left us with debts we didn't ask for and systems we didn't choose?" Heads turned. Some nodded faintly. Others looked uneasy, caught off guard by the truth in his words. Trump leaned back in his chair, his expression hard to read. Was it surprise? Respect? Or something else? Traoré didn't wait to find out. He turned to the room, addressing not just Trump, but every leader, every camera, every soul watching. "We have challenges, yes," he said, "but they're not accidents. Our gold lights up your markets. Our cobalt powers your phones. Our coffee warms your mornings. And what do we get? Crumbs. Our children go hungry, so your shelves stay full. Our schools crumble, so your factories hum. You call it mismanagement. I call it a design." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A few clapped softly, testing the room's mood. Traoré's voice grew softer, but no less powerful. "Let me tell you about a girl named Amina," he said. "She's 14, from a village in my country. Every day, she walks 4 miles to a school with no books, no desks, just a teacher who believes in her. She passes fields where foreign companies dig for lithium, but her family can't afford a lamp for her to study by. Amina dreams of becoming a doctor, not to leave Africa, but to heal her people. That's not a puzzle, Mr. Trump. That's a promise. And I'm here for her." By now, the room was alive with emotion. Some leaders shifted uncomfortably, aware of their own nation's roles in the systems Traoré described. Others leaned forward, hanging on his every word. Journalists scribbled furiously, sensing history unfolding. Traore paused, letting the silence speak. Then he said, "We don't need your pity. We don't need your lectures. We need fairness. We need trade that lifts us, not traps us. We need the world to see us as equals, not as a problem to fix." The applause started slowly, a single clap, then another. Soon, it swelled into a wave. Leaders from small nations stood first, then others joined. Even those who disagreed with Traore's politics couldn't deny the power of his truth. Trump stayed seated, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. But the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about a young leader who'd just turned a conference into a reckoning. The applause faded, but the energy in the room lingered like a storm waiting to break. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the center of the stage, his gaze steady, his presence unshaken. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't thrown insults, but his words had cut through the polished veneer of the Global Unity Conference. The leaders, the cameras, the world, they were all watching him now. This wasn't just a speech. This was a declaration, and it was only the beginning. Traoré took a step forward, his eyes sweeping the hall. "You look at Africa and see problems," he said, his voice firm but warm, like a teacher guiding a student to truth. "I see possibilities. You see villages without roads. I see farmers who feed nations with their bare hands. You see conflict. I see warriors who protect their families against odds you'll never understand. You see poverty. I see wealth stolen, hoarded in vaults across oceans while our children pay the price." The room was silent again, every word landing like a stone in still water. He turned slightly, addressing the entire hall, but letting his gaze rest briefly on Trump. "You spoke of trade, Mr. Trump," Traoré said. "You said deals should be fair. I agree. But fairness doesn't mean one side takes all. Fairness means my country's cobalt doesn't build your batteries while our schools go dark. Fairness means our gold doesn't glitter in your banks while our mothers can't afford medicine. Fairness means Africa isn't just a resource for your markets. It's a partner in your progress." A few leaders nodded, their faces tight with thought. Others looked down, perhaps wrestling with their own complicity. Traoré's voice softened, pulling the room closer. "Let me tell you another story," he said. "There's a man named Kofi in Burkina Faso. He's 30 years old, a father of 3. He works in a mine, digging for minerals that end up in your laptops and cars. He earns less in a month than some of you spend on lunch. His hands are scarred, his back is bent, but he smiles because his children go to school. Barely. The school has no windows, no chalk, but Kofi believes in a future where his kids won't have to dig like he does. That's not a problem, Mr. Trump. That's a man with hope. And I'm here to fight for that hope." The room stirred. A woman in the audience, a delegate from Senegal, wiped her eyes. A journalist from Kenya typed frantically, her fingers racing to capture every word. Traoré's story wasn't just about Kofi. It was about millions like him, their dreams buried under systems that favored the powerful. He continued, his voice rising with quiet conviction. "You call us broken, but who broke us? When your nations came to Africa, they didn't find chaos. They found libraries in Timbuktu, kingdoms in Great Zimbabwe, trade routes that spanned continents. What followed was theft, not just of gold and diamonds, but of futures, of families, of freedom." He paused, letting the weight of history settle. "Today, the theft continues," he said. "It's in the loans we can't repay, the contracts that bind us, the silence when our people suffer. You call it business. I call it injustice. And I'm not here to ask for change. I'm here to demand it." The word demand echoed, sharp and unyielding. A few gasps broke the silence. Nobody had spoken like this at a conference meant for diplomacy. Nobody had dared. Trump shifted in his seat, his lips pursed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not like this. But Traoré wasn't attacking him. He was exposing a truth bigger than one man. "I don't speak for Burkina Faso alone," Traoré said, his voice carrying a new strength. "I speak for the fishermen in Ghana, the teachers in Nigeria, the miners in Congo, the students in Ethiopia. I speak for every African who's been told their dreams don't matter. We're not here to beg for your help. We're here to build our future, and we'll do it with or without your approval." The applause erupted again, louder this time. Leaders from across Africa stood, their faces alight with pride. Others joined, ministers from Latin America, officials from Asia, even a few from Europe, moved by the raw honesty of Traoré's words. The clapping grew into a roar, a release of years of frustration and hope. Traoré stood still, his expression unchanged. He wasn't here for applause. He was here for something bigger. As the noise faded, he spoke again, his voice softer but piercing. "We're not your burden," he said. "We're your brothers, your sisters, your equals. Treat us as such, and the world will change, not just for Africa, but for all of us." He stepped back, his message delivered, his truth laid bare. The room was electric, alive with possibility. Journalists rushed to file their stories. Social media began to hum, clips of Traoré's speech spreading like wildfire. The hashtag Traoré demands justice started trending, first in Africa, then globally. Trump didn't clap, but he didn't interrupt either. He sat there, his eyes narrowed, as if weighing what he'd just heard. Later, when a reporter asked him about Traoré's words, he gave a short answer. "The guy's got fire," Trump said. "I don't agree with half of it, but he's got something. I'll give him that." But the story wasn't about Trump's reaction. It was about a young leader who'd just shifted the world's gaze toward Africa, not as a place of pity, but as a force to be reckoned with. Back in Burkina Faso, the news spread fast. People gathered in markets, cafes, and homes, watching Traoré's speech on phones and TVs. They cheered, they cried, they chanted his name. For the first time in years, they felt seen, not as a struggling nation, but as a people with power. Across Africa, the response was the same. In Lagos, students shared the speech on WhatsApp. In Nairobi, radio hosts played it on repeat. In Accra, a street vendor painted Traoré's words on a wall. "We're not your burden. We're your equals." The world was listening, and Ibrahim Traoré had only just begun. Part 3. The ripple becomes a wave. Ibrahim Traoré's words didn't just echo in the conference hall. They roared across the world. By the time the Global Unity Conference in Dubai ended, his speech was no longer just a moment. It was a movement. Social media platforms lit up with clips of his calm, piercing voice, his unyielding truth cutting through years of stereotypes. The hashtag Traoré demands justice climbed to the top of global trends, shared by students in Johannesburg, activists in Rio, and even workers in London. Newsrooms scrambled to keep up, their headlines bold and urgent. Burkina Faso's leader shakes global stage. Traoré calls out the West. Africa's voice rises in Dubai. But this wasn't about headlines. This was about a shift, a crack in the old narratives that had held Africa down for too long. In the hours after the speech, Traoré's message reached corners of the world that rarely paid attention to African leaders. In Burkina Faso, people spilled into the streets of Ouagadougou, waving flags and singing songs of pride. Young men and women, who'd grown up hearing their country called poor or broken, stood taller. "He spoke for us," a shopkeeper named Fatou said, her eyes bright with tears. "He told the world we're not invisible." In villages without electricity, families gathered around radios, listening to Traoré's words replayed on every station. Children began chanting his name, calling him Captain Courage. Across Africa, the impact was like a wildfire. In Senegal, university students organized watch parties, pausing the video to cheer at every line. In Zimbabwe, a poet wrote a piece titled "Not Your Puzzle," inspired by Traoré's defiance. In South Africa, a DJ sampled his speech into a track that blared from clubs to taxis. Even in nations where leaders clashed with Traoré's politics, his message struck a chord. "He's saying what we've all felt," a teacher in Uganda told her class. Africa isn't a problem. It's a promise. The continent buzzed with a new energy, a sense that something had changed, not in laws or deals, but in hearts. Traoré's story about Amina, the 14-year-old dreaming of becoming a doctor, became a symbol. Artists painted her face on murals in Nairobi and Bamako, her eyes bright with determination. Activists printed her name on T-shirts, alongside Traoré's words, "Fairness, not pity." The story of Kofi, the miner with scarred hands and unshakable hope, inspired protests in mining towns across the Democratic Republic of Congo, where workers demanded better wages and local control of resources. Traoré hadn't just spoken. He'd given a voice to the voiceless, a spark to the weary. The world beyond Africa took notice too. In Europe, where African issues often faded into the background, Traore's speech sparked debates. Commentators on talk shows argued over his accusations, some calling him bold, others uncomfortable with his bluntness. In the United States, activists shared his words to highlight global inequalities, while students at universities held forums to discuss what fairness really meant. Even in Asia, where trade with Africa was growing, business leaders began rethinking partnerships, Traore's call for equal treatment ringing in their ears. But the real power of Traore's speech lay in what it inspired next. 2 weeks after the conference, he announced the Africa Rising Pact, a bold plan to reclaim his continent's wealth and future. He stood before a crowd in Ouagadougou, his voice steady as ever, and laid out his vision. "Our resources belong to us," he said. "Our dreams belong to us. Our future belongs to us." The pact included new laws to prioritize local companies for mining and agriculture, training programs to empower youth with skills in tech and trade, and a regional council to hold foreign firms accountable. He didn't stop there. He called on other African nations to join, to build a united front that would negotiate as equals, not subordinates. The response was swift. Mali and Niger, allies of Burkina Faso, signed on within days, their leaders echoing Traore's call for self-reliance. Ghana sent a delegation to discuss joining, inspired by his focus on local empowerment. Even larger nations like Kenya and Algeria expressed interest, their officials meeting with Traore to explore the pact's potential. "We've been divided too long," Traore told them. "Together, we're unstoppable." The pact wasn't just policy. It was a promise that Africa could stand tall, not as a charity case, but as a global force. Back in Dubai, the conference's organizers hadn't expected such a ripple. They'd planned for polite discussions, not a revolution in thought. But Traore's speech had changed the conversation. Leaders who'd sat silently during his words now faced pressure at home. Citizens in their countries, inspired by Traore, demanded answers. Why were African resources fueling foreign wealth? Why were trade deals so one-sided? The questions weren't new, but Traore had made them impossible to ignore. As for Donald Trump, he didn't stay silent for long. In an interview with a U.S. news channel, he was asked about Traore's speech. "Look, the kid's got passion," Trump said, his tone a mix of respect and defiance. "He's wrong about a lot, but he's fighting for his people. I get that. Doesn't mean I agree with him." Trump's words were brief, but they carried weight. For a man known for dominating every room, his restraint was telling. Some said he was impressed, others that he was caught off guard. Either way, the story wasn't about Trump anymore. It was about Traore and the continent he'd rallied. In Africa, Traore's legend grew. Young people called him the voice of the future, their pride in him spilling into art, music, and protests. A rapper in Lagos dropped a song titled "Equal Not Less." Its chorus built on Traore's words. A painter in Addis Ababa created a portrait of him, his face framed by the African continent, with Amina and Kofi at his side. School children in Burkina Faso wrote essays about his speech, their words filled with dreams of a stronger, fairer Africa. Traore wasn't just a leader now. He was a symbol, a beacon for a generation hungry for change. Yet Traore remained grounded. In a radio address to his nation, he spoke humbly. "I'm not your hero," he said. "You are. The farmers, the students, the mothers, you're the ones who'll build our future. I just lit a match. You'll carry the flame." His words only deepened the love his people felt. They saw in him not a politician, but one of their own, a man who'd risen from their struggles to speak their truth. The world had changed that day in Dubai. Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just challenged Trump. He'd challenged a system, a mindset, a history. And as his words spread, from dusty villages to gleaming cities, one thing was clear. Africa was waking up, and it wasn't asking for permission. Part 4. The twist that shook the world. The fire Ibrahim Traoré lit in Dubai didn't just burn. It reshaped the world's view of Africa. His speech, his stories of Amina and Kofi, his unapologetic call for fairness, had sparked a global awakening. The Africa Rising Pact was gaining momentum, with nations across the continent signing on, their leaders inspired by Traoré's vision of unity and self-reliance. Social media pulsed with his words. Murals of his face adorned city walls, and young Africans walked with a new pride. But just when the world thought it had seen the peak of Traoré's impact, a twist emerged. one that nobody, not even his closest allies, saw coming. It wasn't a speech or a policy. It was a revelation that turned the story of his clash with Trump into something far bigger. Weeks after the Global Unity Conference, whispers began to spread. They started on X, where cryptic posts hinted at a secret meeting that had taken place behind closed doors in Dubai. The posts were vague, mentioning a deal and a handshake that changed everything. At first, they were dismissed as rumors, the kind that swirl around any big event. But then a leaked audio clip surfaced, grainy but unmistakable. It was Traore's voice, calm and deliberate, speaking to none other than Donald Trump. The clip was short, but its contents sent shockwaves across the globe. The audio revealed a private conversation that happened hours after Traore's speech. Away from the cameras, in a quiet room reserved for the conference's most powerful players, Traore and Trump had met face-to-face. Nobody knew how the meeting came about. Some said Traore requested it. Others claimed Trump was curious. But what they said changed the narrative entirely. "You spoke tough out there." Trump's voice crackled through the audio. "I respect that. You want fairness? Let's talk business. No charity, just deals." Traore's response was steady. "Business is fine, but only if it builds both sides. My people deserve more than scraps. Give me a deal that respects Africa, and I'll listen." The world reeled. The man who'd stood up to Trump in front of billions, who'd called out the West's exploitation, had sat down with him? It seemed unthinkable. Social media exploded with reactions. Some called Traore a traitor, accusing him of compromising his principles. "He's shaking hands with the same system he fought," one ex-post read. Others defended him, arguing that engaging with power was the only way to change it. "Traore's playing chess, not checkers," another user wrote. News outlets scrambled to verify the audio, while pundits debated what it meant. Was this a betrayal or a masterstroke? Then Traore spoke. In a televised address from Ouagadougou, he faced his nation and the world, his expression as resolute as ever. "Yes, I met with Mr. Trump," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Not to bow, not to beg, but to negotiate. For too long, Africa has shouted from the outside. I chose to step inside, to sit at the table, to demand what's ours." He paused, letting the words sink in. The world is not changed by speeches alone. It's changed by action. And action means talking, even with those you disagree with. He revealed the outcome of the meeting, a proposed trade agreement unlike any Africa had seen. Trump, known for his deal-making, had offered to partner with Burkina Faso on a mining initiative. The terms were unprecedented. 70% of the profits would stay in Burkina Faso, funding schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Local workers would be trained to lead the operations, and foreign companies would be required to invest in community projects. "This is not aid," Traore said. "This is respect. This is what fairness looks like." The agreement wasn't finalized, he added, but it was a start, a crack in the wall that had kept Africa's wealth flowing outward. The revelation flipped the story on its head. Traore wasn't just a fiery orator. He was a strategist, willing to engage with the world's most controversial figures to secure his nation's future. Critics who'd called him naive began to rethink their stance. Supporters, who'd worried he'd softened, saw his boldness in a new light. He didn't just challenge Trump, a student in a cross said. He outplayed him. The hashtag Traore Plays Smart began trending alongside hashtag Traore Demands Justice, capturing the duality of his approach: fierce in public, cunning in private. The impact rippled beyond Burkina Faso. Other African leaders, inspired by Traore's audacity, began rethinking their own negotiations. In Nigeria, officials demanded better terms for oil contracts. In Zambia, lawmakers pushed for local control of copper mines. The Africa Rising Pact, already growing, gained new urgency as nations saw what was possible when courage met strategy. Traore's meeting with Trump became a symbol, not of compromise, but of a new kind of power, one that didn't just shout for change, but built it, brick by brick. Back in the United States, Trump faced questions about the meeting. In a rare moment of restraint, he kept his answer short. "Traore's a tough guy," he said. "We talked. We'll see what happens. Could be a good deal for both sides." For Trump, the meeting was a chance to burnish his image as a dealmaker, but for Traore, it was a step toward rewriting Africa's story. The world began to see him not just as a revolutionary, but as a leader who could navigate the global stage without losing his soul. In Burkina Faso, the reaction was mixed but powerful. Some protested, wary of any deal with a figure like Trump. Others rallied, trusting Traoré's vision. In a small village, Amina, the girl from his speech, heard about the agreement on a neighbor's radio. She didn't understand the details, but she smiled, dreaming of a school with books and desks. Kofi, the miner, told his children about it over dinner, his scarred hands steady with hope. "The captain's fighting for us," he said. "Maybe one day, we'll dig for ourselves." The twist had changed everything. Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just clashed with Trump. He'd turned a confrontation into a conversation, a speech into a strategy. His legacy was no longer just about words, it was about results. Across Africa, people began to believe that change wasn't a dream, it was a deal, a fight, a future they could claim. And as the continent rose, one truth stood clear. Traoré wasn't asking for permission. He was building a world where Africa stood tall, not as a puzzle, but as a powerhouse.